JDH said he'd be joining us in 2 minutes.
Okay, sounds good.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for inviting me up.
Hey, JDH, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Great.
Doing
Great.
well.
Great to have you here.
Yeah, fun.
And Chris as well. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, hey,
Hey,
Chris.
Chris.
Hey, gang. How's everyone?
Good.
Good, doing well. Everybody's still on this life in West America, eh?
Yeah, let's talk about that drop. Popped off
Yeah, I
overnight,
mean,
huh?
pretty incredible. I mean, I saw Raoul Paul tweeting about it this morning, or was it last night? I didn't catch the timestamp on it, but that seemed to give it some more legs. And yeah, it's just been moving up pretty much every day I've looked at it so far.
I have some thoughts on this drop. I'm curious what thoughts you guys have on this drop. I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, it's almost like almost like an emergent category. Is that unfair to say? I mean, it's very interesting, though.
Yeah, so why do we think, brain drops had been a little bit quiet for a while, I think, early to this AI art, and and now in recent times, AI has got to the tip of everyone's tongue. But, this is kind of crazy. We're up to 5.5 ETH floor on this in what, like less than a week, from a 0.10 drop. It's like the old days.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. What was the cost for? I mean, I know it depended on when you bought it, but there was obviously a cost for being whitelisted into that drop, right? Because it was half gone, and then it was botted like instantly when it opened to public, I think.
Yeah, as I saw it, it was a drop of 500, and I think it was like 120 to 140 were whitelist minted in a half hour. So the first half hour was open to whitelist, and to be on the whitelist, you needed to own one of each of the pieces from the first three brain drops from back when, and especially because Claire Silver's piece drop Genesis has gone way up. I think that's now like maybe an 80th floor or something, and the others are a couple ETH or something. So to assemble that set today and be on that whitelist is north of 10 ETH. But
it's like 13 and a half.
13 and a half. Okay. But there were still 350 or so of this were minted in open minting. But I mean, I was on my mobile phone, so I put an unsophisticated bid in without adjusting gas or anything immediately when it opened, and I didn't hit. So I assume it was botted or bought by very sophisticated people who did more than just the default gas.
Yeah, it went. I tried to mint a second one, and I couldn't even get my MetaMask to not RPC ever.
Yeah, it definitely minted out quickly, but it was kind of fun just aping secondary right afterwards. It was cool to like see all these different outputs pop up on the floor, and like each one, every single time you saw one hit the floor, you were like, this is aesthetically interesting, which is kind of the validation you look for on a new project.
Yeah, so why were people paying attention to this? I assume you all haven't been necessarily paying attention to every brain drop with this much intensity. Is it because you like the art here? You saw this thing ahead of time and you're like, this is good? Or is it because AI is now top of mind for people and so brain drops now top of mind? Why were you guys focused on this?
I mean, Matt mentioned in our group chat that he liked it, and obviously I've had a little bit of interest in AI. I know you, myself, and JDH have spoke about this a little bit. I have been involved in some of the brain drops, some of the earlier ones, but I haven't been paying super close attention to it. But I do like what's going on here. I guess the question is, on a broader AI topic, is like, well, what makes for great AI? And I guess like the conventional thought right now is that they look photographic, but when you take a closer look, you can tell that there's a couple things that are off that right now is kind of endearing, and that down the line when this stuff is perfect, this will be looked at as this big leap forward as we're getting closer to what we know it's going to eventually look like. But I mean, it's really hard to know what you're supposed to buy. So I would definitely like to hear from my fellow panelists, our guests especially, where they think this is going, and what are we supposed to focus on in this space, and more importantly, why?
Just going right at the big questions there. I mean, I think with life in West America, what happened with people is the drop was so disorienting, and it struck a chord in them that people really couldn't put their finger on. And so they kept returning to the drop again and again and exploring it. And anytime art pulls you in a new way that makes you question your relationship to it, your relationship to a form, like it's gonna do well. And so with that specific drop, I think, it's the first time we've seen a post photography AI, storytelling, and then this like disturbing, almost like David Lynchian sense of like hallucinatory nostalgia, come together in a complete package that really just like hit people in the feels and kept them coming back to it. I mean, for me with that drop, like I never met my grandfather. He died before I was born. I've seen hundreds of pictures of him, and he lives in that world. Like he looks like one of those people. Those settings are very familiar, like within my memory of a place that, like belongs to my family, but I've never been to. And so like I think for that one, AI pulled this really neat trick of erasing time, or like flattening time. So like you could almost like conjure up a past that was, like you felt a bond to it. At least, that's for me was kind of what happened there. But, like AI as a form, I think is going to be able to do a lot of things that, like it's a more advanced suspension of disbelief, that I think is going to be able to transport people into different places. I mean, that's specific like to that, drop. But I think as you like look at AI as a bigger category, like there's a lot of different levels to appreciate it on. And, if you can do a little bit of research and get into the processes of how it's made, different approaches creators can take, you can start evaluating outputs, from the perspective of like how the creator is coming to the table here. Are they building their own tools? Are they training their own models? If they're training their own models, there's this whole editorial skill set of what they're putting in there, and how they're transforming that up as they take it through a process. And then, it's weird, like AI art, like, let's just compare it to gen art for a second. Gen art relies on like mastery of algorithms, that are like narrow techniques, like flow fields, for instance. I think AI works at a slightly like deeper and more powerful level in that like you're mastering the entire system's ability to create outputs, and you don't need to spend as much time, teaching it narrow styles. The same way like a gen artist has to learn those narrow styles, learn how to apply them. And so, when you've got an AI artist, like they're free to jump across a bunch of different styles and really start demonstrating like skills of layout, conception, composition, and like just generally like broad good taste and imagination. And so then, you start to see AI artists who work in multiple styles, like neural bricolage. Helena Sarin is an example, right? Like she does generative work, she does still life, she does pottery, she does portrait, and they're all amazing looking. And so, you know, you can kind of like evaluate someone like her as like being a master of the tools on a really deep, low level, but then, you know, at like a more surface level, like exhibiting, you know, great style and taste across a broad range of categories, which, you know, it's like, wow, that's the total package. And, you know, at least that's for me, that's sort of the journey I've been going through and understanding and appreciating AI art.
I think that's pretty insightful. I mean, you've done so much thinking about the AI art canon generally. I'm a little bit more of a noob in looking at this, but as I looked at this Life in West America drop, just to, you know, as I'm imagining why people are joining this Twitter space, you know, one thing that I might want to know if I were listening to this discussion of people who've been collecting for a while is how do you decide what to collect? And, you know, it's very easy to just say, collect what you love. And there's some truth to that. But also, you know, some people are looking at this either as an investment or maybe I want to collect one to keep and one to sell to sort of pay for this hobby, or I collect what I love, but I also don't want to lose my shirt on it. And so I'm just kind of curious how our hosts here and everyone on the call thinks about drops. And I think to me, this one's instructive on this attribute because it's almost a throwback, right? Like it minted last week at 0.1. You know, this is like back when, you know, early days of art blocks when it was like a fixed price drop, and you kind of maybe you could have known that you were going to be in the money just from the get go. I don't know that maybe just like one or two of the brain drops, you know, or even anywhere down low around 0.1 in terms of secondary. So if you could mint at 0.1, you kind of have some confidence that you've got a good investment out of the gate. It's like, it's a low price. And so, and even in the early secondary, I missed the mint, and then I bought one of these drop in early secondary for 0.5, and you know, which obviously is well in the money now with a 5 ETH plus floor. So how do people think about that? And just to offer my experience on this drop, you know, I looked at the collection and I really enjoyed and wanted to look through the pieces. I thought they spoke to me. I thought particularly interesting was the fact that in a small thumbnail format, it just looks like you can't tell the AI artifacts in a lot of cases. It just looks like a historical portrait, a resonant historical portrait. And then you open it up big, and then you see that, you know, I'm looking at this one that's for sale right now for 6.35 ETH called Parental Supervision. It's cool. You know, it's like this woman in a car, but then you look close and, you know, there's like way too many hands on this thing, right? And then, of course, you got the typical AI artifact of text is just gobbledygook. But so to me, the reveal of going from at small at a distance, you don't really see that it's not right, and then you see up close and it's right, and it really speaks to the time now when this AI art generators are so powerful and yet not perfect. And I think photography is a semi-challenged category in NFTs. It's hard necessarily to get your head around it, because if someone takes a beautiful photograph in most cases and then makes an NFT of it, say makes a one of one of it, you know, obviously there's a right click save issue that you have to get over to be into collecting NFTs regardless of the situation. But particularly, I guess, in the photo situation, the fact that, you know, it is just this pixel perfect rendering of the world, and really, I mean, you get this in a lot of one-on-ones, the fact that you're only using the blockchain for the asset registry effectively versus a lot of the generative things, drops where you might not be sure what you're going to get, or what you put into it might influence what you get. I don't know. It really sets it apart. And so I think photography is just such a clean interpretation. It's almost too clean to put up a beautiful photo and make it an NFT. I just don't know that there's enough difference from the previous mindset of the art world to feel like this really is a lot of what's so exciting about NFTs is doing new things, or what feels like new things. And that doesn't feel as new to me. But anyway, when you look at this AI art, when you look at this particular drop, it's clear that the artist had a voice, and the way they incorporated these distortions or artifacts of AI is really trying to say something, and then yet it's also beautiful. It's so beautiful despite these mistakes, quote unquote mistakes, and the disconcerting nature of not seeing them at first and then looking and then finding. It's like an Easter egg hunt, looking at this thing, finding more more things that are wrong, just more interesting things that are wrong. It makes me want to look at this thing, at bigger and bigger resolution, so I can find all, oh my God, there's another leg hiding in the back seat of the car, kind of thing. So anyway, all that came together. But the last thing I'll say, then I'll hand off to someone else here, is the other thing that spoke to me about choosing this drop. I heard about this drop because Derek EDWS collab currency guy talked about it on his interview on Kevin Rowe's podcast, or I guess does he co-host that podcast, whatever, on 100 Proof the other day. He highlighted this one as one coming up he was excited about. That was enough, because he has good taste, for me to go check this out ahead of time and see that I liked it and put it on my calendar, not in bold enough ink to actually be at my computer and succeed in the mint, but bold enough that sitting in a cafe with my phone, I tried to. And then in the communities I'm in FlamingoDAOs, Discord, and other Discords, I found it seemed like it was a polarizing drop. And I think that's always been a pretty interesting sign to me, when something is a bit polarizing to people. Those projects have on average tended to do well. So those are kind of my indications. And then with this throwback style of minting, everyone mints at 0.1. It's sort of like you couldn't go wrong, right? So yeah, 0.1, at least for me, and I think probably even for a lot of people on the call, you can just buy it for the art. At 5 ETH, I mean, some people can, just buy it because they like it and not worry about the investment because they just want to own that art. But I think at 0.1, that's a very accessible price point where a lot of people can say, well, the worst case, I'm going to get a piece of art I like. And so that's pretty cool. Anyway, that's why I got onto this one.
I wonder if, some artists like explore this in the future, some version of this. Like, to me, it's like fairly dystopian, right? So what happens if, not if, but when the AI gets better, and like you look at some of these outputs in this Life in West America collection, and the text, for example, turns into complete sentences or words that are actually readable and make sense, right? As part of the interest that these are incomplete or they're errors, to use some of your words. And how does that change, like, as AI gets better? Does that make it less interesting?
Well, when you compare this to, if you go into, like, say, the Midjourney Discord, right? And you can go in the test channels and you can see, what all the public mints, or I think you can actually you have to be, if you're not at a very premium tier of Midjourney, all of your mints are public. So you can see these beautiful things people are creating. And, people in general seem to be striving for error-free. I'll put this in air quotes too. I don't know if this error is the right word, but just like, something that's very beautiful and not obviously AI generated. And those things look amazing. I mean, you sort of look at those and you say, I kind of can't believe that, just this 15-word prompt produced that. What a world we live in. But on the other hand, this feels more like, again, in quotes, art, in the sense that there's, the use of AI, of a lot of AIs, to make something. It's like, I want to make something that a really talented artist could have created, but would take, tens of hours, and just do it in seconds using this AI art thing. That doesn't have as much of a point of view as this Life in West America drop does, from my perspective.
I just want to say we really need to give our guests a proper intro, because we kind of jumped into it. I don't know if AB, do you want to do that, or do you want me to do it, or whatever you think?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Chris, if you want to jump in, I know we sort of went right to the fun part, but yeah, I'd love to know a little bit more about you as a collector, and sort of what your interest in the space was and how that's progressed over the years.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, sir. Yeah, hey everyone. I'm ChrisF. I got into NFTs really from being in the DAO, which is an early stage venture DAO where, we backed Super Rare, Avagachi, a couple of early NFT projects. And as we were, kind of understanding that space, we realized it was an entirely different scene, in the crypto world that we've been missing out on, but also realized the DAO wasn't, really structured to hold 721s. And so, that begat FlamingoDAO. And, as we were going through that process, I was discovering the space myself. And then, I was one of the early members of Flamingo, where we all kind of like collectively put our heads together to, figure out what the heck is going on here, and how do these dynamics work. And so I would say, like, with me and NFTs, it's really been like a journey of like participation where I've gone through many different postures and styles. And, for a while, I was just like, I don't know, let's just do this. Seems fun. For a bit, I was kind of flipping because it was a fun way to make money. As I started developing attachments to pieces, certain things I didn't want to part with. I think I transitioned more and more into a collector. And so, for me, like NFTs, they're interesting, both in and of themselves. They're pretty things, they're clever things, they're communal things. But then, like, the entire system and ecosystem, I think just has so many emerging dynamics in it. And sort of like, it's like 20 minutes into the future. And so for me, like, as much of like the NFT space is, oh, I'm into the cool thing, or, oh, I spotted something early and sold it for money, as it is about like, what does this emerging financialization of belief look like? What does our transition from broadcast to network media look like? What does the future hold? And I do feel like we're here. We're maybe we're a little further ahead than other people, and that's really exciting for me. And so, I'm kind of like a participant. I'm out there. I'm doing a bit of this and that. Sometimes at scale, sometimes just a little further along than other people. But, like, I'm mostly here for fun and to learn.
Yeah. JDH, I don't know if you wanted to just chime in, although I don't want to hog the conversation, but yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'll just make it fast. I mean, I got into all this NFT stuff in a similar way to Chris. My career as an entrepreneur and an investor, each for about a decade, and then, when this DeFi boom and all this interesting stuff in the Ethereum ecosystem started to happen or got on my radar in 2020, I was super excited about all the innovation here, and dove head in, and like Chris, though a bit later than Chris, I joined the LAO just because I was looking for investments, and that's in the DeFi and crypto space, and the LAO was a good group of people who'd sourced a lot of interesting stuff. I was a late joiner. They'd already had the initial membership had already been set up. It had been acting for a while, but they admitted some more members to raise a little more investable capital at some point, and I came in a bit late. And at the same time as that was happening, FlamingoDAO was being started, and I just joined for the heck of it. But it's turned out to just be so interesting to me. The NFT space is just so fun to engage with these artists and this output, and have all the challenges to it that I've really concentrated a lot of my time on NFT stuff over the last couple of years. And you can particularly see it over the last 6 months. My personal thesis of style and approach to investing is that that every few years you'll have an insight or see an opportunity ahead of the rest of the world, and you can really lean into that, and you have a lot of advantage. But it's pretty important, like when you're between insights or between points at periods of conviction, to just wait until you have high conviction. And right now it's just I don't know. And so I'm just kind of I'm not being aggressive from an investing standpoint. But I notice I continue to spend tons of time doing NFT stuff and hanging out with my NFT friends doing stuff like this, whereas I'm not spending a ton of time checking out the latest DeFi protocol or staking innovation or whatever. Like I check that out, but it's like, it kind of feels like work, and this kind of just still feels like fun. So even though I can't divorce the money from it, I mean, I think the investing and the appreciation and the money is tied into NFTs for a lot of people, and that's me too. I notice that even when that's not at the core, I'm still putting my time and energy in here. So something about this has definitely got me hooked.
I just want to say, JDH, your collection. I was going through your vault. It's pretty spectacular. I mean, if anyone hasn't taken a look
Thanks,
at it,
man.
it's worth checking out for sure. Yeah, I mean the Fidenzas, the Ringers. I noticed you owned 50 bold squiggles. Like that's literally 12% of all the bold squiggles. I mean that's quite a play. So overall, I mean, you have a pretty high conviction bet on, as a lot of us do. Your collection is definitely very impressive. So it was very much enjoyable looking through that, and I would recommend people take a look through JDH's vault to see some really pretty amazing collection. So good work there, JDH.
Yeah, thanks, man. I mean, I had good timing, I guess, lucky timing. My vault, if anybody wants to snoop it on OpenSea, just JDH_vault is the vast majority of the stuff I own is in there. The bold squiggles is an interesting story because I had my collection is very art blocks heavy, and I think at this particular moment in time, that looks pretty smart because art blocks is done relatively very well compared to PFP and other stuff lately. And I don't, maybe that's like I was smart and I knew that that's where the best stuff was, or maybe it's just lucky in cycles, and we'll see. But I do have a lot of bolds, which is an interesting story from both the rightness and the wrongness of that. So I have roughly 50 bold squiggles, and I got the squiggles from CryptoPunks, and I got the CryptoPunks from Flamingo guys talking about CryptoPunks in early 2021, end of 2020. Flamingo built a pretty monstrous collection of punks, and learning about CryptoPunks from the members of Flamingo who are very savvy about it. It really resonated with me, all the attributes of that project and why it was both cool and historic and had unimpeachable provenance, and that made it likely to be one of the cornerstone collections in NFTs. So if you want to build an NFT collection, that seemed pretty interesting to me. And then when, and as many of you know, when Eric founded Art Blocks, he took a lot of inspiration from punks, and most of the money he used to start this thing he did by selling punks. As he's told on a couple of podcasts, he had, when the punk drop happened, he was around and he'd claimed a bunch of the zombies. He thought the zombies were cool, and I did not claim punks in the punk drop. I was way late for that, but apparently you could just claim the ones you wanted to back then, and he claimed a bunch of zombies and sold some of those and funded a lot of his Art Block startup there. Anyway, hearing these stories about this and then seeing the parallels he designed in the Squiggles collection with the rarity traits and attributes and things, I kind of, at some point when punks or when Squiggles had appreciated a bit, but were sort of like 0.1 ETH for a floor basic, and bolds were like 0.4 ETH, and pipes were like maybe an ETH, and hyper rainbows were a few ETH, and the rare types of hyper rainbows would not really go on sale much, but they were 30 or 40 ETH. I thought, there's a lot of upside in this collection. I'm going to go ahead and just like load up, which turned out to be a smart thing to do. But what the dumb thing was, I sort of saw the punks. I saw the bolds as kind of being equivalent to zombie punks, maybe in their rarity. They're not quite that rare. I mean, zombie punks are more rare, but as an upper tier rarity within the collection. And so I said, I'm going to be clever, and people are going to want these because they're only, there's 5,000 basic squiggles and several thousand, slinkies, but there are only 400 some of these bolds, so these are going to be pretty valuable. And then also to some extent pipes I bought a bunch of, and some hypers. And so I decided to load up on the bolds, spending between, for several months there when the prices ranged between zero point 0.4 ETH and a couple of ETH. I was sort of just like a continuous buyer of these bolds. I would just buy the floor all the time. So it's before you could put out collection offers on OpenSea. And so that's worked out well. I've got like 50 bolds, which is super cool, and I love them. So I have no problem with it. But it's interesting that I could have bought maybe 8 times as many floors with the same amount of money, right? If I'd just been buying the floor at 0.1 ETH, I could have way more squiggles in my collection. And if you look at the trading pattern over the last 6 to 12 months, floor basic squiggles trade at right now at like a 14, 15 ETH floor, and they trade every day. Several of them trade every day. And when there's moments of passion about squiggles or new people come in, maybe dozens will trade in a day. And I think bolds trade maybe like once a month, a bold trades or something like that. And the recent trades on bolds have been like 25 ETH, maybe not quite 2x the price of the floor. So it's obviously a great trade buying 50 of the bolds at probably an average price of like 1 to 1.5 ETH. And those are probably worth 30 ETH now. And that's an awesome return. But man, I hadn't yet learned that lesson that just from an investment standpoint, you almost always just want to buy the floor, because it would have been like a 5x better investment if I just bought the floor.
Chris, do you have like a particular style with collecting, or how, if so, like has that changed over time, and how does it manifest today?
Yeah, I mean, I'll adopt several different postures. I'll run them in parallel to each other. And so, there are times where if I feel like I'm early and onto something, I'll be very aggressive in scooping up stuff. And, that's me with AI art right now. There's another part of me that just likes crate digging and, kind of discovering stuff that maybe hasn't quite had its moment yet. And so, for instance, like Bitcoin, I picked up a couple of Bitcoin back in November. It just, was added to the Pompidou collection. I think the floor is now at 2 ETH. And so, like that for me is a little more curiosity, because you can't really do a lot of that crate digging in volume, but that's another thing I like to do. And then I like to, identify trends that are, just about to hit and maybe try to get ahead of them. And so, one thing I'm doing a bit of right now, very selectively, is trying to understand like upcoming supply squeezes around, some of the blue chip NFTs, or like the really, in demand NFTs that are, kind of at that point where maybe only like 6% of them are listed. And, at that level, there's a fat floor that gets thin really, really quick. So when supply starts dropping below 4%, 3% listed, and so I'm doing a bit of that right now. I mean, I think that's an emerging trend, and I'm not exactly sure how it's going to play out. But what I like about it is there's very little downside. Like I bought a couple grifters at, I don't know, like 17, 18 ETH. And it's really like this leveraged option on ETH, because, if there isn't an NFT bull coming up, like grifters will do fantastic. And if there isn't one, well, like it's not like, grifters are going to drop in value. And so I kind of like that as a bit of a mature style. And so, like I'm not doing any one thing. I'm usually doing like several things at once.
Thank you. We're going to change directions a little bit here. One of the topics that I've had a couple conversations with my co-hosts about, as it specifically relates to Gen Art, is the relationship between statistical rarity and eye appeal or artistic value of a piece of Gen Art. As someone who's been in the space from the beginning and some of the earlier stages, where a lot of the art looked more or less very, very similar, a lot of trades were driven by rarity. But I think that as the gen art space has evolved to where we are now, and a lot more interesting outputs are being created, artistic value has clearly gone way up in value, and eye appeal, obviously, it's art first. So everybody wants to own art that looks attractive. But the question I have for our guests, and obviously my co-hosts can weigh in on this as well, is when you're looking at a piece of gen art, do you factor the rarity, statistical rarity, or overall rarity as it relates to the pieces in the collection? And then, from my perspective, I definitely think that eye appeal is more important than rarity, but I do weight rarity as something to at least to consider. I'm just curious as to how other people feel about that.
Yeah. So I think it's drop dependent, right? Like if let's just take the harvest, right? Because that's a great example where rarity and aesthetics compound together, right? Like, I think Jonas and Flamingo identified this early on, that there's really two floors in the harvest, right? There's the light mode floor, and then there's the dark mode floor. And, there's, I think maybe 20% of the set, or slightly under 20%, are dark modes. And, that floor is now 20 ETH because they're striking. They work on this epic level that you're just like really hits you, in this sort of heroic way. And then, the light ones, they can be a little messy. There's some really clean, nice ones in there, but they just don't hit as hard. And I feel like with art blocks, that's sort of like a classic setup when rarity enhances aesthetics. But there's a ton of art blocks drops where, the rarity has very little to do, and, the aesthetics are going to be the primary driver.
Do you think that makes a project better or worse when rarity is the primary driver? Do you think it doesn't matter?
I think it's a classic setup.
Yeah.
I think if you pattern match back through the history of art blocks, that when you get grails, grail outputs that are rarity driven, it sets those drops up in a way to take off that doesn't exist in some of the more consistent or, aesthetically oriented drops.
Because it might be easier for maybe new participants to understand what pieces are important within a drop if rarity is more of a factor. But because a lot of times people don't have the artistic eye to be buying into these projects off aesthetics alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think the true gen art grail is not only incredibly amazing eye appeal, but also happens to be a rare output. And obviously, you can have something super statistically rare, and if it's just not attractive, no one's going to care about it. So yeah, I mean, I agree with what Chris said in the sense that it is drop dependent. And you take a drop like Gazers, I don't think anyone. I mean, I have a pretty good Gazer collection. I don't think anybody has ever looked at the. I don't think anyone's ever looked at the statistical rarity in Gazers because there's so many that relate to color and color theory, and it's just more about the individual characteristics of a Gazer. But yeah, I'd be curious, JDH, how you see this also, please.
Yeah, I do think that it's changed over time, and I think as we're all just getting into gen art in art blocks and the early gen art stuff, the analogy to CryptoPunks was strong, and rarity seemed to drive value with CryptoPunks. Not perfectly, some less rare attributes, like a hoodie might be more valuable than some rare and less aesthetic attributes, but there was a strong correlation of rarity and value. And the way I think about it now is that it depends on the collection, and that I think of all this art, there are multi dimensions to it, but I think often about this little dimension between collectibles and fine art, and that all this stuff in my mind, every drop falls somewhere on that continuum. It's really multidimensional. It's an oversimplification, but that continuum. And so stuff that's closer to the collectibles end, and an example of a trade I have done recently in a large scale, it would be friendship bracelets. Feel more like a collectible to me in a way. It's not. There's something to like about all of them. They're aesthetically pretty, and I think it's very good art, but I don't end up with like really strong preferences between one or the other. I like lots of them. And so therefore, if set aside for a second, if people are familiar with that drop, the palettes, which are the obvious elements of rarity, if you just take the remaining 25,000, 28,000 friendship bracelets that are not a palette, I just think there's not a lot of differentiation based on the rarity. Is kind of it's not laddered in a way that makes it obvious from the looks. And so there between them, you either view those as either the aesthetics you like, or you just view them more like an ERC20, like an interchangeable token that it's an addition almost, even though each one's unique. It's almost like an addition. I want to be part of this club of friendship bracelet owners. So I've just sort of violated my continuum right there a little bit, but it's project by project. I think, in that case, it's aesthetics, but it's not going to attract the value. It's going to be priced the same, so you can buy the aesthetics you like because you're not going to get value on the other end for it. But some other projects definitely that have structured the rarity in such a way to have a handful of compelling pieces. I don't know. In some cases, I think of those as collectibles, and the rarity matters because people are really going to hold this as a collectible, and they're going to want the rare thing. And then other projects like this, other projects, it's just really on the aesthetics. And I agree with the sentiment that was expressed that the aesthetics have come more to the fore as collectors have merged in the space. People are more focused on the aesthetics. But from a pure investment standpoint, I still come back to if you are doing this for investment, the floor is a very safe place to participate in most of these projects because your opinion of aesthetics may differ from somebody else's opinion of aesthetics, or impressions will change over time. But if you buy the piece that's the most flooriest floor piece, well, it can't get derated any lower than that. So you're never going to be wrong about the aesthetics, and you might surprise yourself. It might go up in relative aesthetic assessment, but it's not going to go down in relative aesthetic assessment. And so you have upside in an aesthetic re-rating. And so then now you've just got a fairly pure bet on how well does the project do overall in that case. Plus, you'll always have the most liquidity.
Yeah, I think about it sometimes like I'm definitely more aesthetic driven, and my aesthetic is geared towards minimalism. So when I look at drops, I always go towards those more minimalist outputs. And a lot of times I'll end up maybe like slightly overpaying for something that I really like, which maybe the market doesn't. And then that's got me to over time think about this idea between pricing, especially as prices go up, about the compression between the floor price and these like statistically rare outputs and the premium multiples that come along with that, right? So I know JDH, like you think about like swiggles, right? Like with bolds, for example, as prices go up in USD value based on how Ethereum is moving, like what do bolds look like? Maybe at $1,000 ETH, they trade at, I don't know, 4 or 5 times the floor, and maybe at 5,000 ETH, they trade at like 2.5 times the floor and stuff like that. So I wonder, like, if you think about that, and maybe you didn't back then, but that's sort of a driving force now, and how does that, go into your investment decisions?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because the rarity element that drove me, or my thesis on rarity, was centered around from an investment standpoint. I want to highlight that I buy a lot of art in NFTs just because I like it, and I've been buying tons of cosmic reefs and cosmic blooms, and I recently bought a ton of color spaces, and these projects are not necessarily performing well, but I just really like them. And so a lot of times I'll buy for that, but there's sort of a ceiling on how much I'll spend just to buy for art. And I do sometimes buy for investment. And when I think about investment, I mean, my initial thinking coming out of CryptoPunks is that, the rarity ladder affects, people wanting to display and flex and show that they have taste, or they have style, or that they have money and they can afford, to spend millions of dollars on a JPEG is a flex that people would have. And so I had entered the space coming with the CryptoPunks hypothesis that there would be high performance at the very high end of the rarity ladder, because people with a lot of money would get highly competitive for just like a handful of pieces that really show their ability to flex. And that did seem to prove true for a little while, but in the peak of this bull market here. But in general, I think that has not, the impulse to just want to be in a collection, and part of it has maybe been stronger, and only really the number of transactions that trade at very high prices at hundreds of ETH on that basis are pretty rare, and very often those pieces, as many of those pieces have been aesthetic driven as pure rarity driven. Like you could think of like the tulip Fidenza as being a canonical example of that. Sometimes it's aesthetics plus rarity. The tulip has aesthetics plus rarity, I guess. And sometimes it's more pure on one of the two elements. But it's really been a handful of pieces and kind of a bull market phenomenon that have really traded at those very high prices as individual owners and collectors wanting to flex on those. It seems pretty rare. And then a lot of the other very high price secondary trades have been into funds, Starry Night or 6529 or various funds, which have a related motivation, I guess, but maybe not the same psychological motivation as an individual on that.
Yeah, as you said that, it made me think about maybe a third category beyond just statistical or aesthetic, which is, quality of mimetic, right? So you think about something like the Goose. I haven't looked at the rarity rankings for ringers lately, but I know Goose is like not in the top 5 or 10, I don't think. And yet, it's arguably the most important piece that's ever come out of Art Blocks and thus far, right? So is it more about finding those outputs that are mimetic or that memes can be built around them? And are those the driving forces for the biggest premiums that any output in a collection will carry?
Yeah, certainly if you're a young investor in the space, or if you're highly motivated, it's clear that one of the premium strategies in the space would be to collect something and then increase the meme value of it after you collect it. And as I look at the Goose, Goose became Goose in part because the owner was highly active in Discord, in the Art Blocks Discord, and would summon it a lot and really attach the name branding. It's a great piece too, and it's sort of impressive that this naive algorithm created something that aesthetically had this animal-like character to it. But the creating of the meme associated with that was very value creating. And if we look at Squiggles, I think the biggest sale, the single biggest entry and exit I did was buying a perfect spectrum squiggle for roughly like 0.18 ETH and selling it for roughly like 1,000 ETH. And that trade, that perfect spectrum was a mimetic quality that the community kind of created within the Discord of identifying that attribute, which was not called out, and then socializing and giving it status. And so, that's a good strategy, I think, is to see these collections, see something in them that you can meme into existence, and then do a good job of meming it can be a way to really increase the value of your holdings.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm going to change directions just a little bit. Chris, I noticed that you are sporting a Singularity as your avatar. Singularity was one of the drops on Art Blocks that really got me hooked to the point where I was like, wow, this gen art. I was really into that drop. I minted quite a few of those. I know you've been sporting that for a while. Just would like to hear why that has so much meaning for you, and why you've kept that as your avatar for so long.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a Singularity was the drop where art blocks really clicked for me on multiple levels. I think it was the first time I saw Gen Art like capable of like hitting me in the feels, and just filling me with like awe and wonder and just going, wow, this shit can really do something. And that's not to disrespect Squiggles or any of the earlier drops, but like I minted floors like 12 floor Squiggles and I just didn't get it, but by the time Singularity came along, some folks had taught me war minting, and that you just kind of need to keep getting out there. And so, the Singularity drop, it was on New Year's Day. I was hungover. It was pouring out, and I just kept minting these things. I minted like 14 of them. And I'd had like all floors up to like number 10 or so, or 11. And I was just like, God damn it, I'm going for some color. And so I just kept minting. And my last three ended up forming a triptych. It was this red Singularity, a blue one, and then one of the greenish purple ones. And they all came out really narrow and tight without a lot of that radial flare. And so, yeah, this one just, I set it as my Discord avatar. I never unset it. On Twitter, I'll flip around between my punk, this, and then, occasionally some rando stuff. But I don't know, I kind of like the Eye of Sauron vibe to it. Like there's just this minimal intensity. It's a good piece. And so, I figure if I haven't left it, maybe bring it back out on Twitter and kind of cement my ID in a different way than the Sea of Punks. I mean, I love my punk. I'll probably throw my punk back out there. But like Singularity, it feels like a good fit for me with my PFP.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I enjoyed that drop quite a bit myself. And I wanted to highlight that the punk avatar that our friend JDH is sporting was previously owned by me, and I sold it to him in, I guess it was January or February of, I want to say 2021. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's right. January, I think. That's right. Right after I got the CryptoPunks thesis, I was like, I want one of these. And I'm so uncreative that I went for the totally literal photo of me.
I'm glad you have it.
There's nothing wrong with the totally literal photo of yourself. Makes it easier to hold on.
If only that was the case. Matt,
Yeah.
I mean,
Isn't it a one trader too?
I think so.
Yeah, it's one trader. Just the smile.
Matt, we talked a little bit before, or I guess maybe multiple times, about this idea of platform agnosticism. And like, I was thinking the other day about collecting, I guess, one of one specifically, and you have like sort of your pick of the litter, right, with Super Rare and Foundation and some of the other like smaller platforms. How do you think about that in decision-making process, and how do you think that's going to change in the future?
Yeah, I think like we're definitely still kind of seeing it, but I think it's less so. Like, because I remember early on there was a certain artist, you had a one of one of theirs on Foundation. I had one on Super Rare, and that artist's work was selling quite a bit over the course of like a month over the summer, and somehow yours didn't catch any bids, but aesthetically it was like pretty much on par with the Super Rare work. But I think like more so as the market gets more sophisticated and more aggregated, I think we'll probably see that become less the case. That's just how I feel about it, but I'd be curious to get others' thoughts.
Yeah, Chris, I wonder, like, when you're looking at, I guess we're on the AI subject, there's definitely a lot of these artists. I mean, I think about Helena, for example, where I bought her work on both platforms, and I think there's definitely such a thing that, like, there's a premium for one platform over the other. And when you look at that stuff, especially if you're backfilling, like, do you care about this stuff, or is your like thesis, or is your view so long term that it just doesn't matter?
I think it's dependent on what you're buying. I think like Art Blocks carries a brand premium as a platform, where I mean, you have to put out something truly mind-blowing off of Art Blocks as a network set, to even like be able to approach the premium and the liquidity that the Art Blocks ecosystem brings. Foundation is funny because Foundation's like my happy place at the moment because there's so much good AI art coming to it over the last 2 months that really no one's out there getting. And so it's kind of like you feel like you're early. There's this validation of like, Foundation's got a nice reputation. They're a quality platform. And, like you just sort of feel like, oh, they're getting something that I'm getting that not a lot of other people are getting. And so like, like I've had a very good feeling about Foundation lately because I think their curation of who they're bringing in the AI art space has been very strong. But yeah, like Foundation doesn't have, that same awareness, liquidity, et cetera. And so, there's a bit of a concern where, like, look, Xcopy is big enough that like he's kind of the only reason known origin is even mentioned anymore. And so I think certain artists can transcend or, carry legacy marketplaces with them. But to achieve that, you got to be really, really, at the top of the game to pull that attention. And so it is a concern. But, it's like if the creator has a strong enough reputation, I'm less concerned about that. But yeah, like Helena, like, I think she's incredibly intelligent about knowing where to put certain things. And so like her AI, like portrait stuff, I think that has like a really like high visual appeal, that all lists on Super Rare. When she does her generative, or still life or like other things, that goes to Foundation. And so even I think creators kind of, are picking and choosing where and how to do this.
Does this change when we see like platforms that exist like OpenSea or some of the other competitors like start aggregating by artist, and so you can just see like the full collection or the full portfolio of all of their work and all the different styles minted on all the different platforms, et cetera, et cetera? Do we see like, I don't want to say arbitrage, but do we see just like the premiums between those works sort of compressing and people just looking for allocation by artist rather than allocation by collection or by specific work or something like that?
Good question. I don't know. I'm not like deep enough around the 101 super rare world to understand, why that carries so much of a premium with certain people, and those people drive the market. So great question. I don't know. Anyone else?
I mean, taking the same analogy over to the Gen Art space, an example of a collection I like is well, I like Leo Villarreal's work, and so I collected a bunch of Cosmic Reefs, and then he recently did a follow-up project that has a lot of similarity called Cosmic Bloom. It's great. He chose to do it off of Art Blocks for the second project for various reasons, in part because it gave him different ability to control, but there were some technical differences too. Like it's stored on IPFS versus the Art Blocks where the entire code is stored on the Ethereum chain. The entire piece is stored on the Ethereum chain. He did that so he could increase more complexity at an affordable cost, I think, if I have it exactly right. And then he also did something where he pre-made the collection, and then, as I understand it, he culled out some of the less appealing pieces, which is an activity that alternative, because Art Blocks doesn't support that. The algorithm is the algorithm, and the mints are generated dynamically at the drop always. There's a higher development load on the artist because you really have to cover off all those corner cases in the code ahead of time versus getting it pretty much right, but then cleaning it up after and then just dropping the pieces. And so I think also possibly some of these platforms not only are just the community of people that are centered around the platforms, but there are some technical attributes that can be different between them. And it's an interesting question. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, it surprises me that Cosmic Bloom, which Leo liked better, it was his iteration off of his Cosmic Reef project. Cosmic Reef sells, I haven't looked today, but sells 1 ETH something floor, 1.5 ETH floor, 2 ETH a couple months ago. And Cosmic Bloom was down to, last I looked, I don't know, 0.3 ETH floor or something like that with a similar collection size. And so that's either, well, it could be a lot of things, but it's sort of at face value, it just seems like a discount for being off of art blocks and losing that community. But I do wonder whether some of the technical decisions associated with it and the, those differences on IPFS, not on Ethereum, and not, and the ability to cull after the mint and just drop pieces to people rather than dynamically minting, if that's also factors that affect the price and collectability.
I was just looking at Twitter while we were having our conversation. I noticed that Cosmo de Medici just made a very large contribution of a bunch of NFTs to LACMA, which is the Los Angeles County Museum. Is it authority? I'm not really sure. But including his signature CryptoPunk, the COVID zombie, and a ringer and a bunch of other AI pieces as well. Just kind of wondering what you guys might think about these. Just in general, it seems like there are some donations being made to museums, and hopefully other museums potentially start getting active in this space, and that could ultimately really be what pushes a lot of this stuff where we think it's going. And just kind of wondering what our guests might think and my co-hosts.
I think they should ask JDH for a bold squiggle, because since he's got so many of them.
Yeah, I've made approaches, or I've told museums. It's funny, this museum dynamic is interesting because, of course, we would all, as collectors, love to see the top museums begin to collect NFTs, right? I think it's important it's an important signal, validation of the category as art. Maybe not everybody would like that, but I would like that, and I think most of the people would like that. And I've actually made that overture before to various people, and in various talks. Like, I know a long time ago, after the ringers drop, Dimitri was really keen on getting the MoMA to collect ringers, or apparently this was the discussion, and he was participating in it, so I think it is true. And at some points I had offered, like, look, I'm happy to donate some really nice ones, if it's something like that. But there, for a long time, nothing has happened. And now with these two, the Center Pompidou and the LACMA donation, seem to be the first two high profile real NFT collecting moves by museums with a lot of credibility. There may be other, I know there's like a Seattle NFT museum, and there's some other things. So I'm not saying these are the first donations overall, but certainly the two highest profile I've seen. And, I think it's great. I wonder how these are going to be displayed, whether they're in the permanent collection, whether they be exhibited in the permanent collection, or exhibited at all, right? So museums own tons of work that never gets exhibited, or very rarely. So, I guess you're just always raising the bar. The first thing we want is LACMA to collect NFTs. Now we're going to say, yeah, but we want you to show them all the time to everyone who comes in. So, but I would happily donate. There's a lot of valuation issues associated with that, but I would have loved to have donated some NFTs, particularly last year. So.
Yeah, from my point of view, I think about it, NFTs, as they age, they communicate differently to hold attention. The same way a baby doesn't talk the same as an infant, as a kid, as a teenager, as an adult. For these drops that have been out there for a while, this sort of institutional acceptance and canonization of them. These are how mature projects start speaking and holding the attention of their community, especially when there's a very small float and there's not a lot of price action, or they start approaching illiquidity. It certainly is a validation of them, and is a strong signal that sort of can reinforce that illiquidity, as saying, hey, there's not a lot of this shit selling because this community of holders have agreed that, either they don't want to sell it, or the cost to part with that, is this high. And so, when you see news like this, to me, this is just, we're seeing maturation and new stuff emerge. And, for bag holders, it's fantastic.
I wonder if we'll see more of it. I mean, probably, right? I mean, do you think it's to some degree like on the responsibility of the community and the collectors to say, hey, listen, like we're going to make it a point to work together and donate these things to these museums and sort of like take the power into our own hands and not just wait around for them to figure out if they want to buy something from the open market or whatever they want to do.
Yeah, my impression of it, having talked to a few of these museum heads, is that in this and in the traditional market both, the challenge is not finding donors or finding pieces that'll be donated actually, because there are plenty of people who would do that. I think the challenge up till now has been within top museums sort of a conservatism, right? Like you've got a director and then you've got like an acquisitions panel. They have some other name for it. I'm not thinking of it right now, various people, but basically like there was brand risk. Like these are mostly managers, not founders, effectively at the museums, right? And so they take career risk on putting NFTs into the collection because, we're all immune to it as crypto people, but in the broader world, crypto seems scary and possibly a scam. And I'm sure when FTX blew up, there were a ton of museum directors who were like, thank fucking God I didn't take any of those NFTs, because now people will be calling me and saying, why are you tarnishing our brand like that? And so I think a lot of these museums are just waiting, especially the top ones. They really don't have to be first. MoMA doesn't have to be first because they'll be able to get what they want when they want to come get it. And so, yeah, so getting a couple of institutions with the brand of LACMA and Center Pompidou in might release the floodgates of other, because now this reduces the career risk, right? Now, if you're the SF MoMA, you're like, well, LACMA did it and Center Pompidou did it. I'm not going to be out on an island as the first big branded museum to start collecting this stuff. Anyway, I'd always thought when I would talk to these museums that they would want to be first, right? That they would have this mindset to say, I want to start collecting. I want to get CryptoPunks in the collection first. And I can be the museum that got it first, or I can get the best ones. Or certainly if I wait till last after 10 other museums have it, it's going to be harder to get people to donate good ones. But the mindset always actually seemed like the reverse of that to me. It seemed like a risk-averse mindset. You didn't want to collect this stuff and then look like a fool afterwards. And then if you do collect, if you look at the Center Pompidou, there's just one art blocks piece in their collection, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, everybody. It was the Petro Nacional, right? Is that the one? Do people know? Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so you would say, well, geez, I don't know that those of us who are big art blocks collectors, I mean, it's a great drop, but is that the one you would have thought that would be the first one collected by a museum? It seems surprising to me, but is the guy French? Is that right? I'm not sure who the artist was, but
he's actually, I think he's Irish.
Okay,
but yeah. I think Pace having something to do with that project. Yeah, I mean, he's a Pace artist, so yeah, I mean, I guess exactly. Having that kind of backing probably lends more credibility to the project.
Less risk,
from the museum.
Or less risk, right? So if you collect an artist that's already collected at big institutions, then you're like, well, I collected an NFT, but it's this guy that we already had in our collection. So that's what I would see likely at the forefront of things people collect is from artists that are already collected. So you could see you'd see a Tom Sachs NFT at MoMA maybe before you see Tyler Hobbs NFT at MoMA.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, because ultimately, there's a lot of risk associated with any involvement here, especially from the eyes of a museum or an institution. So I guess if they can kind of have that slight reassurance that there's some built-in stopgaps or safety nets associated with this artist or that art, it makes a lot of sense from their standpoint.
So how does that affect the market now? Does everybody just go back and backfill? Do you see people that only collected on the traditional side, like making their foray into NFTs? And I mean, do you look at alternative asset funds and family offices and stuff like that are saying, okay, this is the validation that we needed to, throw some money around in this little playground? I mean, what does that look like?
I don't know. That's a good question. What's
I
happened to
mean,
these projects at the Petronational? What's happened to the Petronational floor since this has been announced? I see it's
I don't think really much has happened. I think a couple WETH bids got hit, including one of mine. When I saw the announcement, I just threw like a kind of below floor bid out there just to see if it would hit prior to maybe the news getting out to the broader audience. But there really hasn't been much of a reaction from the markets since that announcement was made, which is a little surprising to me.
I mean, I think I was going to say, sorry guys, go ahead. I apologize.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, Bitcoin doubled its floor. It took a few days to get there, but it's also such a thin floor. That's all I had. Go ahead, BM.
I mean, I feel like we can debate whether it's good or bad, but realistically, from my perspective, the museums are going to own these pieces. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind, and I would say most of the people here. We don't. Does anyone think at the moment is not going to own a autoglyph at some point? I mean, I don't think there's any chance that they won't own something like that, and probably CryptoPunks and probably all this stuff. It's just a matter of when it
so
happens.
you're saying it's
So
priced
yes,
in? It's not moving
no,
because
it's
people
no.
because it's well no I mean seriously like it's if it's a certainty right then it would be priced in
No,
already yeah.
I think that once these museums start chasing very finite assets like autoglyphs and CryptoPunks, and they start becoming sinks for these assets, that's when prices can make a move to the point where it becomes much more unattainable. Where we're right now, we're clearly not there yet. And by the way, we're not there yet because places like the MoMA have not started collecting stuff like this. But from my perspective, I don't think there's any doubt that that's where this is going. So for me, I want to hold these assets and accumulate the ones that I think are going to be bought up down the line. I think that's the same thing that most of us with a longer term collecting outlook would do things. I assume that's how you're looking at it, JDH.
Yeah, I am. I mean, I think that's right. I think that the best collections that will happen. I don't know how much is priced in, honestly. I mean, I do think this is where I get a little contrarian. I think with some of my other big fan collectors is I think to the extent this stuff is collected in the market because it's art, that it will trade and perform a little bit like art has historically, more or less, is my best guess of it. So when Derek, who I mentioned earlier, I take his opinion highly. He's the one who, when he said, look at Life in the West project, I went and looked at it, so I'm going to disagree with him in a second, but I bring him up because I respect his opinion, and I think I could be wrong. His view on Squiggles, for example, is that Squiggles will have $1 million floor someday. And I can't fucking see it. I just can't see it. Like, yeah, I mean, there's no analog for that in the traditional art world. And he has a lot of reasons why it's different than traditional art. And I acknowledge those reasons. It's a networked asset and it does the whole world. But it would be so incredibly unprecedented. I mean, honestly, the current pricing of Squiggles, a 10,000 piece collection with a floor of $25,000 is fairly unprecedented in the art world. I mean, not an art expert, but my understanding of the art world that is extraordinary already. And so while acknowledging all your points, VM, and what you said is true, I agree with all that. For the most highly valued collections of 1,000 pieces or 10,000 pieces, I'm a little more agnostic than some of my fellow collector bulls as to how much price appreciation that will carry with it because of the relatively high pricing of these large collections relative to anything else you see in the art world that we already have today. I could see futures where Squiggles are the thing we all expect them to become. They're in museums, they're a cultural icon, and maybe the price isn't 10x higher than it is today, a $250,000 floor, or much less $1 million floor, or much less maybe only the current floor. I think Squiggles, I think it's really unbelievable to me that Squiggles have a $25,000 floor with a collection size of 10,000 a couple of years into this. That's just remarkable to me, and so I'm a little more agnostic on how these trends that you talk about affect pricing going forward, especially on the large collections.
Wait, you didn't get the no FUD message, JDH? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. All right, so let's end on that note.
No, I think that one of the reasons is because it's actually, for Swiggle specifically, it's more than just art. I mean, it's taking on significance as a play on just the gen art market as a whole. It's a bet on Snowfro. It's a bet on all the things. I think it's more than just art, and I think that's part of the reason why it's able to have the value that it has. But no, I mean, I'm not saying to you that everything may happen exactly the way we all think it's going to happen, and the Squiggle floor might not go to, probably doesn't go to $1 million. I think that's a little bit too extreme. But I think that given how early it is in the space and how few people actually own NFTs and interact with OpenSeas every day, if you look at where this market could be and the potential down the line, I think that we could definitely see higher prices. I don't know if we're going to go to, I don't know if we're going to go to $1 million though. But I hear what you're saying, JDH, but back off on the FUD a little
Yeah,
bit.
no, I mean, I'm just looking online. Again, I don't want to claim too much expertise on this, but looking up an Andy Warhol, obviously a pioneering artist who was in some ways more than just art. An edition size of Double Elvis has an edition size of 3,500 pieces. Now, this is a straight edition, right? We can agree that that Squiggles are not an edition. Everybody has a 101, in addition to being part of a set. And there's lots of reasons to believe it would be more valuable. But, I think these sell for, low thousands of dollars or whatever is the prices on it. And so it's just a large set, and a high price. But it's supporting it now, right? So it's supported it through an up market and a slightly down market. I guess the artifact might be that you got these big holders like Hoodis and stuff who just so much of the supply is locked up. But I guess VM, that's your thesis, is the supply does get locked up and people just are not going to sell it regardless of price. That's certainly a museum would be an example, in which case maybe it does. The marginal piece, the collection size isn't 10,000. It's whatever the free float of the collection is. And the free float just gets so small that the price just goes bonkers. I could see it.
This sort of brings up an interesting point I've talked to some people about before, which is how do you price what's expensive in generative art? And what do you use as a comp, right? Do I take the most established contemporary artists in the art market, like a Rothko or somebody like that, and I look at everything they've ever made, and their entire catalog raison added up, and use that as a comp for where Squiggles should trade or where all of Eric's art should trade or something like that? How do you think about that, or do you even use that as a comparative metric?
I think about this a lot too, as well, and I think I early on, especially, I tried to comp a lot of things to traditional art, but less and less. There's so many differences as well. If I own a Warhol edition that there's 10,000 of, I don't have a Discord or Twitter or a community of other owners that I can directly interact with right away. You don't have the same network effects. You don't have the same liquidity. You can't just, if I want to sell this, I probably got to contact a gallery to help me list it, and they're taking a cut of it as well. There's just kind of so many areas where this generative art market breaks free from kind of the traditional ways you normally think about the art world.
Yeah, there's just so many different inputs.
This time it's different.
Yeah, we'll so early. This time is different. We're all going to make it. But I mean, I think there's so many variables at play, and so many new emerging things that, if you want certain anchoring points, like the analog, trad art market is one. But then, you're getting premiums on something like Squiggles because of the liquidity that it has, because of the ease of, transactions, that it being on ETH enables. And then, you do have it like, yeah, it is a tracking token for the entire gen art market. It's a brand, it's a lifestyle, it's n number of things that, can amplify on top of like, that anchoring valuation. But like those things can also work against it, should attention fade or, like the speed at which you can get in and out of something. I don't really know how this one's going to go. Like, I think we all got to wait and see. But, the trends are promising.
So maybe if you think about it that way, what maybe a better parallel is comparing like the different blockchains to each other, right? I mean, is the Tezos discount real? Should it be? How do you think about comparing artists or work from the same artist on different blockchains?
Yes, yes, and yes. Like only ETH has proven its ability to store value in meaningful ways, when it comes to NFTs. A lot of that has to do with how robust its network security is, its permissionless culture, the fact that like it can point a upward trending price history back to 2017 with CryptoPunks. I mean, like ETH is the gold standard here, and it's not to say other chains can't capture some of that value, but I mean it's hard to see it in the short term. I think we'd have to get to the point where it's really too difficult to transact on mainnet from a cost perspective, for other chains to make heavy inroads there.
I think that's an interesting hypothesis. If you could isolate just the alternate chain dynamic and say this collection's on Tezos, but the quality is top notch, the supply is in line, the artist's overall body of work supply is in line, appropriate, and this is the best work they've done. I think buying on Tezos now with a hypothesis that the blockchain discount would close over time is a pretty interesting trade to make. I wouldn't bet all my money on it, but I do think there's a decent chance that those works could just get ported to Ethereum at some point when Ethereum wins, and the market is kind of fine with that transition. I think for the best works, I think that's a pretty interesting trade to try and make.
I agree with you. I think that as someone who's bought some nice pieces on Tezos, I maybe have 2 or 3% of my NFT portfolio on Tezos right now. I look at it like there is definitely some blockchain risk, blockchain survivability risk, but in the same sense that you should be able to buy the pieces there at a discount because of that. And ultimately, if we view this whole ecosystem as thriving down the line, NFT ecosystem, there might be enough there to support a second and a third blockchain even potentially. So I like some of the Tezos stuff that I've picked up, but I think that there absolutely should be a discount for all the reasons that our guests just highlighted. But also there should be more upside too. If the blockchain survives and thrives, I think that the potential returns are going to be higher. So it's almost like stepping down in quality, in the bond market, or stepping down in quality in any asset class. As you take on more risk, you should, in theory, get more return. So I do think that I have a higher expected return when I make an investment or buy something on Tezos. And again, it's art also, so I'm mostly buying it because I like the art. But if we're talking about it from a market standpoint, I think you have to factor in a higher expected return and factor in the risks that some solution may have to come to pass, like JDH just mentioned, porting stuff over onto Ethereum if Ethereum ends up being the only one that survives. So I think that there's room for us to collect on that on these other blockchains. We just need to make sure we're factoring in the risks correctly.
What happens in those situations though, where like a specific chain where some of your art lives falters or is on the verge of faltering, and you want to be able to like bridge it over, you want it to survive or whatever. I mean, there's been discussions of, of artists like potentially the pieces gets lost or burned and then they remint it on a different chain. And there's obviously a lot of discussion around how that could affect provenance and therefore value. Have you thought about that at all, and what that looks like in the future?
I mean, I think someone like on the level of Zancan or William Mapan or one of these artists that's really well known, I think that there would be no doubt that they would come to some kind of solution to get that. I would like to think that there would be a way to come together to solve that. I think that for lesser tier art, or even some of the artists that aren't, still around, I think it's going to be a harder solution. But I'm open to hearing other thoughts on this.
Well, and on that, just because you mentioned William, there's a startup called Tonic that I'm friends with the founders of, but they're doing a new drop of his I think in a few weeks here that I think is going to be pretty awesome. So that's another one to look out for in terms of multi-platform and whether this all sort of normalizes between. I do think that, when those of us who really made a killing in art blocks built our collections, it was being early to that platform when it was not widely regarded as an improntor of quality as it is now. And for the up and coming investor, whether it's different blockchains like going to Tezos or different platforms or emergent platforms where people might drop, like we saw with brain drops or other things like this tonic drop coming up, there's higher risk and higher reward for doing that work and finding out stuff that's going to work over the long run.
Being early has never been wrong. So, someone's got to get out there and take those risks.
I was reading the Richard. You guys know Richard Chen from One Confirmation. He put out like I don't know if it was a Medium or some type of blog post online like not too long ago about sort of, I don't really like this word, like blue chip NFTs, but like more so the best of the best generative art specifically, among other things. And he was talking about the store value thesis. Do you guys sort of agree with this idea that the best of the best generative art belongs in a portfolio, at least partially, as a store of value? Or is it like way too early for that?
I'm a subscriber to the store of value theory. It's, in a lot of ways, right? It's about network collusion between holders and their ability to, keep enforcing higher price points. But that's no different from, other markets. It's, I think, it's one of these theories, right, that can only be proven out through time. But what we've seen to date, has been supporting it, because I think there's so many ways value gets created on chain, that like sort of amplifies your whole assets in a way that doesn't hurt you. Like I bought ETH in, like the 35, like 350 range, 350, 400 range. I saw ETH, 10x. I bought art blocks with some of that ETH. My art blocks then 10x. And so I don't necessarily view my blocks as something like I ever need to touch. And so if they can like double, if they can increase at those levels, and then entire systems come in and validate that, either via utility through lending or, through museums collecting it, or through later entrants deciding, no, that piece is worth it, and validating that amplification, like those create loops which feed into each other and support the store of value theory. So as time goes on, it continues to look better. I think the question more is just the durability of that. And, I think when we saw, FTX like just implode, at the same time we had year-end tax harvesting happening, I do think we saw a winnowing of the field, in the NFT market. Like we haven't had net new wallets really move up. And so I think there was a lot of repositioning amongst, existing collectors to kind of flight to quality, which also then helps, that store of value narrative again. But, as we go full bullishness, can that thing start to erode? Yeah, because, you know, a lot of the very top tier gen art projects, their floors have kind of hit a ceiling. I mean, Punks look like a stable coin. You know, Ringer's floor is around 60. Fidenza's, you know, hovers somewhere in the 90s to 100 range. And so the fact that like those haven't crept up, you know, is a is a vote against, you know, how far a store of value can go.
I mean, I would just say that to me, there's no doubt these will be store of value. Just like we're kind of emulating a model that's already used in real in the non-crypto world. Art as an asset class is held by most wealthy people as a means of diversification, as a means of owning an asset that has lower correlation than traditional asset classes. So if we view if I don't really distinguish between traditional art and NFT art, meaning it's all art to me, but I realize that that's not the way the world sees it. But as the world starts taking on our view more, I don't think there's any doubt that high quality, top tier gen art is going to be considered a store of value, just like Rothko's or Warhol's or Picasso's are considered a store of value.
Hey, Al,
What do you think it would?
I hate to kill the party,
Yeah, go
but
for it.
I'm gonna have to pop off here. But thank you for hosting me on the space.
All right, thanks, JDH.
Thanks for coming,
Appreciate it.
JDH. Thank you.
Yeah. Cheers. See you guys.
See you guys. Vaughn, I wonder if I force you to build a portfolio of, I guess, all the various forms of art that exists like within NFTs right now, you know, like generative AI, and doing a mix of that between, you know, one of ones or shorter long form collections or whatever it is. So, you know, how would you spread your money across, and like what does that look like from like a percentage point of view? You know, are you like 75% generative and 25% AI? Like, what do the splits look like?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, I think that AI has a higher risk return profile right now, so you would obviously weight it a little bit lower because I think you could get outsized returns in it if you're right. But like, you know, if I'm constructing a portfolio from, you know, purely from an investment standpoint, and you know, I'm talking about like you're in a seven-figure plus type portfolio, like an investment size portfolio. You know, you got to own an autoglyph, you got to own a punk or two, and then a lot of it's going to be, you know, would definitely be a pretty healthy allocation to art blocks and gen art. I would have to have an X copy in there. You know, some other one of one artist, but I will tell you, I don't spend a ton of I don't look at the traditional, I don't want to say traditional, I don't look as much at one of one art as I spend on gen art. I really feel like gen art is, especially long form gen art, is really like the natural art of crypto, because in the absence of blockchain, you couldn't do long form generative art, meaning the model that Snowfro put forward was premised on using blockchain, that you couldn't do long form generative art. Blockchain solved the problem of enforced scarcity. So, you know, for me, it's kind of like the gen art market is the natural art of blockchain. So that would be why, you know, I have a healthy allocation to it. I think it's part of the reason why gen art as an asset class has done well, and will continue to do well. So, yeah, I mean, some allocation to PFPs, but definitely Gen art is gonna get a pretty big allocation, and it's going to be, you know, your top tier projects, Fidenzas and Ringers and Squiggles and Gazers and Archetypes, and you know, some of the early stuff also. So you know, that's how I would be doing something if I was constructing an investment portfolio right now. And I think if you look at some of the investment portfolios like Curated or 6529 Fund, I mean, it's, you know, that's kind of the model that they're using. They're buying these, you know, I know you said you'd like the term blue chip, but it's a good term to use in terms of like looking at what these larger institutional scale buyers are buying right now. And I don't think that there's any doubt that as the space grows and investment grows in the space and more funds get involved, and the money's going to flow to the same assets, in my opinion, and it's going to could create a pretty big squeeze at the top.
Yeah, when I think about this question, I think about, you know, if I'm allocating, do I want, you know, generative art at large? Do I want specifically on chain, like fully on chain generative art, even within the context of AI based art. I mean, some part of that process is generative as well. So does that spill over into like the generative part of the portfolio? Do I just say screw all that and I want to allocate by artist? These are all like good questions. Chris, I'm curious, like if you have any thoughts on it, and sort of do you decipher between category or artist or a mix of both, or where do you land?
Yeah, I mean, there's a million ways you can tackle this. I personally bias towards network collections over standalone, and so I would start with by saying 80-90% of my portfolio is going to be in networked collections, meaning drops that can range from like maybe 50 as a minimum size up to 10K on the max. And then, that other 10, 15, 20%, is more about, can I spot standout artists, making one of one work early enough, where there's also enough sort of quality to want to make that bet. So then, flipping into that huge, chunk of like the network allocation, I think Gen Art deserves, half at least. Maybe up to 75% of it. And, it's because Gen Art is the crypto native form. Not only is it crypto native form, but it can reach back into, the legacy of the contemporary art world prior to that. So there's a continuum, that gives it an acceptance within the trad world. And so then within Gen Art, well, I'm going to continue that bias towards like network liquidity and, stay within art blocks. Within art blocks, yeah, there's, basically 12, sort of drops, I think, that have achieved that, store of value, quality, like, the check enough boxes where if I was a building a portfolio, like there's enough surety in their histories and what they've accomplished that I would work in those. So, it's hard to argue with like VM's approach. I think maybe I'm just thinking about how I would slice it up, differently, like at a thematic level. But, I think you're not going to go wrong by playing the hits with, a big chunk of what you're allocating. And then there's so much alpha that you can gain in discovery that once you've cemented, maybe 75% of like that total portfolio, in things that have histories, then that other 25% is where, I would start going crazy in like AI specifically, just because I think we've seen enough pattern matching to how digital art, or crypto art emerged, and then how Gen Art emerged, right? Like, I think AI is going to go through that same process of like discovery, understanding, acceptability, but because this is the third time around, it will happen at a more accelerated level. Now, at a certain point, AI art starts looking unattractive, either because the price points run up or because there's a glut. But like at this moment in time, I feel like there's a lot of like early like moat creation around some sets. Like I have no clue, right, whether post photography AI is a big enough category, right, that we'll see more and more life in West Americas. I do know that, Twin Flames has proven that standout early sets, right, in photography NFTs can hold a liquidity moat around them. So I don't know. I mean, I'm starting to ramble here, but that's just some of my thought process.
Yeah, that's fair. Matt, I'm going to throw one last question your way, and I think we'll probably wrap it up. But what's something that you think, let's say a year from now, will be very obvious to everyone in the market that isn't necessarily the case today? And if that's a little bit too much of an alpha reveal for you, you can let me know.
Yeah, I haven't I mean, I think about this a lot, and my answer probably changes like somewhat frequently to this question. But I think we touched on it earlier. I think I really do think we kind of have this watershed moment underway in the AR sector, and now we kind of have this moment where people are paying more attention to it, and so the bar is going to get higher. But I think just like with long form gen art and projects like Ringers and Fidenza, you kind of need that one project that kind of breaks through that initial barrier and resonates with more people beyond its current audience. And I think there is real potential here for this project we were discussing earlier to have that same ability. I don't want to cause people to FOMO into something though, so I'm trying to be careful with my words here and my predictions.
Vaughn, anything specific that stands out to you?
I mean, the easy trade is to talk about AI, which is kind of why we're having it. I mean, right now it's the higher risk space and should offer higher potential returns if it works out the way we think. So, I think all of us are trying to spend more time in this space, and I think that, just seeing how quickly something like Chat GPT has, come into favor, and the rapid adoption rates, and we can all see that this is going to be something big. I think it's really just more about, I don't think anyone's still really sure about how to play it, but I think that the AI play is going to be obvious a year from now. But I'm not sure if it's West America or Lost Robbies or something we haven't even thought of yet. So, or something we're not even focused on yet. But I mean, I do think that a year from now, the AI trade is probably going to be the trade. The problem is can't really tell you how I think it's going to exactly play out.
Chris, final word. Doesn't have to be relative to AI. It could be anything, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, here I'm gonna go like a million miles high here. For me, like when I'm thinking about like NFTs really broadly, like I'm viewing them in this macro context. Where we're transitioning away from like broadcast media being the dominant form to network media being the dominant form. Like when you switch like that, right, you get new styles, you get new forms of media. NFTs are one of those. And if you put that against this idea that, neoliberalism basically turned capital into speech. I think AI and automation right now is turning capital into labor. And a lot of those trends all converging to me is, a signal that like capital is going to start turning into belief, and that a lot of this early NFT market is more about like us signaling beliefs and values through money. And it's not like, I'm not sure if it's entirely obvious right now, but as time goes on, I think that will become more normalized, and we'll start to see, flows of ETH through like some of these shorter, tighter attention projects like PFPs as actually like us collectively signaling futures or values or beliefs that we want to associate ourselves with. And we'll start viewing a lot of the movement through the market really as like liquidity is broadband, and that broadband is us, kind of communicating out the futures we want to live in. And so I know that's kind of abstract, but like I actually think that's a big part of what's happening here, and people just haven't had time to unpack that yet. And so I actually think we'll start getting to the point where like the meme economy becomes a more serious thing, and we won't just dismiss it as flukish behavior, but we'll start to figure out what's actually happening. And so, I can see that actually becoming a much bigger part of our world, and us having a better handle on exactly what it is.
Cheers. Appreciate that perspective. I think we're going to wrap it up for today. I just wanted to say thanks again to my co-host, Von Mises and Ballin, and our special guest, ChrisF and JDH for the discussion today. Definitely learned a lot of new things, which is always great. But thank you guys for tuning in, and we look forward to the next show next week, which we'll announce in a few days. Take care, everybody.
See ya.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.